Hello, my name is Elmar. I'm a classical music lover interested in authentic music performance. In this video, I will test the validity of the so-called double beat hypothesis of interpreting metronome indications in the early 19th century music. I will try to find out whether three pupils of Clara Schumann played according to the double beat hypothesis of interpreting metronome indications. Recently, I stumbled on YouTube upon a hypothesis by Wim Winters about the interpretation of metronome indication in the early 19th century. Basically, he claims that all metronome markings we have from the period should be played at half speed of how we normally interpret these markings. I will put a link to his own explanation of his hypothesis below in the description. If true, it means that the music must have sounded radically different than today interpretations of the 19th century works. Wim Winter has made quite a few recordings of works interpreted using his hypothesis, so you can listen yourself how much slower the works become when interpreted that way. I was intrigued by his hypothesis and wondered whether music really sounded so much slower in that time compared to today. Not implausible, one might think. Life was perhaps less hectic than nowadays, and perhaps musical training was not as professional. So now follows the assumptions on which the double beat hypothesis is based. Many early metronome indications until 1840 or so are very fast, and in some cases on the verge of being unplayable. Some examples are the very fast tempo indications of, for instance, the first movement of Beethoven's Hammerklavier Sonata, Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, or Czerny's Opus 299 Etudes. Were they really meant to be played so fast? People were used to use a pendulum for determining the tempo. A full swing back and forth of the pendulum was used as a unit. Therefore, the metronome should be used in the same way. That is, in a full swing to count a unit, resulting in 2 ticks. So, as an example, normally when you use the metronome, and it's indicated that, for instance, a note should be played at 100, then for each note you hear a click. But according to the double beat interpretation, you have to put the metronome on 100 and then hear 2 clicks. 1, 2. According to Wim, all music before 1830, 1840 was played at a slow tempo. As a result of the development of pianoforte around 1840, a new generation of pianists entered the field which tried to impress with speedy performances, and as a result, all tempi of keyboard music increased. So the double beat interpretation of metronome indications indeed solves the problem that the very fast indications in the pieces just mentioned become twice as slow and therefore become playable for many more people, and for the audience of today sound more pleasing. But also other problems arise due to the double beat hypothesis. If a tradition existed of interpreting metronome indications according to the double beat hypothesis, why did this tradition disappear after 1840? And if the double beat tradition disappeared and was replaced by the single beat interpretation, why did nobody describe the confusion that must have caused it? Or were there schools of double beats and single beat schools? According to Wim, Robert Schumann must have been a double beater, and Clara Schumann, his wife, who always defended his music, must surely have been a double beater too then. If there was ever a transition of a double beat tradition to a single beat tradition, Clara Schumann must have witnessed this. So while Clara Schumann survived Robert by more than 40 years, her way of playing was always regarded as belonging to the traditional school of the conservative circle, to which Johannes Brahms, Joseph Joachim and the Leipzig Conservatoire, which had been founded by Felix Mendelssohn, belonged. She was not known to be interested in bravura or in modern developments in music, and was no follower of the progressive circle to which Liszt and Wagner belonged. Therefore, it seems likely that she must have remained faithful to the way of piano playing she knew from her youth. She is also unlikely to have changed from a double beater to a single beater within her life, or have doubled her own speed of piano playing. Unfortunately, we have no recording of Clara Schumann, as she died in 1896, a bit too early for the earliest surviving recordings. Clara was the teacher of the Hochkonservatorium in Frankfurt and taught to a number of pupils who became later famous pianists, including Ilona Eibenschütz, Fanny Davies, Adelina de Lara, Carl Friedberg and others. Fortunately, we have recordings of these people. And we are also lucky to have at least 3 recordings of the complete Kinderszenen by her pupils, namely by Fanny Davies, Adelina de Lara and Carl Friedberg. While it may be dangerous to make too strong conclusions about what recordings by pupils from Clara tell about her own playing, it may be expected, especially because we have 3 full recordings, that we can at least determine whether they play more according to the single beat or to a double beat tradition, if that ever existed. Now, before we will listen and discuss the tempos played by one of the pupils, let's first listen to a recording made by Adelina de Lara in 1949, in which she talked about the teachings which she received from Clara Schumann and her experiences.
I had the privilege of studying under Clara Schumann for 6 years after 1 year's preparation with her famous pupil Fanny Davies. I am proud to have been the bearer of so great a tradition.
The fact that she tells that she's so proud of this tradition indicates that she is unlikely to have changed the way of playing of that tradition.
I was recently given the published diary of Clara Schumann, and it gave me great pleasure to read this. March the 3rd, 1891. Adelina de Lara has now left my school. She was one of my best pupils, and Mary, in particular, thinks she will have a distinguished future.
So Clara Schumann apparently endorsed her way of playing.
Well, the future is now the past, or nearly so. For, to me, it is very often more like the present. So clearly do I remember all I learnt and experienced in Frankfurt. Clara Schumann had not only the Schumann tradition to hand on to her pupils, but she had in direct descent the tradition of Bach, Beethoven, and other classics. She numbered among her best friends such masters as Chopin, Mendelssohn, Henselt, Moscheles, and Liszt. She told me how often she had played duets with these great ones, and sat by the piano while they played to her their compositions.
Here she claims that Clara Schumann represents an indirect descent of the great masters of Bach and Beethoven. This does not seem to indicate any awareness of a radical change in the way of piano playing. At least it shows that Clara Schumann and her pupils had a mindset of sticking to a tradition rather than changing a tradition. A change in speed by a factor 2 would certainly not fit into such tradition. Let's now listen what Adelina de Lara tells about the liberties Clara Schumann allowed her pupils with respect to fingering.
Some students seem to think fingers can be used anyhow, so long as the passage can be made easy. That is very wrong. The hard way is the best way.
Apparently, Adelina de Lara obeyed to the teachings by Clara Schumann, even it made life more difficult for her. It shows how serious she took the teachings of her master. If she did not take liberties in using fingers to make a passage easy, how do you think Adelina de Lara would have thought about increasing the speed of a piece by a factor of 2? Therefore, it is quite unthinkable that Adelina de Lara played radically different than her teacher. So, for me, it's quite clear. When you listen to recordings of Adelina de Lara, it's about as close as you can get to the way that Clara Schumann taught their pupils. Time for some music now. Let's listen how Adelina de Lara plays von fremden, Landern und Menschen in a tempo only slightly slower than the metronome indications by Robert Schumann. This is faster than we are used to in most contemporary performances. Let's now turn to another famous pupil by Clara Schumann, Fanny Davies. She lived between 1861 and 1934. She is considered one of the most famous students of Clara Schumann. She studied with Clara Schumann in Frankfurt between 1883 and 1885. She was introduced by her to the local audience in England. The English critics immediately considered Fanny Davies a worthy successor to Clara Schumann. Fanny Davies considered a perfect technique like Clara Schumann as subordinate to the interpretation. Her play seemed to have been a perfect reflection of the teachers. From 1921 to 1930, she recorded Schumann's piano concerto, the Kinderszenen, and the Davids Tänze. Let's listen how Fanny Davies plays the Traumerei. Her performance is the fastest I know. She finishes the piece in less than 2 minutes, while all other performances take more than 2 and in many cases even more than 3 minutes. While in the opening bar she chooses the same tempo of a quarter note 50, she makes expressive use of rubato and plays some bars much faster. For example, she reaches in bar 4 a speed of a quarter note 80. While that is still below the tempo indicated by Robert Schumann, it demonstrates that faster tempi do not necessarily make the piece mechanical. It definitely shows that the metronome indication should not be applied in strict tempo and must be regarded as a very general indication for the whole piece. One can say that the tempo rubato style is typical for all recordings by the pupils of Clara Schumann. They all use a great amount of rubato, much more than we are used to today. Let's listen. Let's now take a look at the results. In this overview, I show you measurements of the metronome speeds chosen by 3 pianists in the different movements of the Kinderszenen. The colors orange, red and yellow are respectively the measurements of Adelina de Lara, Fanny Davies and Carl Friedberg. In dark blue, the original metronome indications by Robert Schumann are displayed. The lower blue bar represents the speeds which Robert Schumann indicated, but then at half speed according to the double beat hypothesis. Overall, you can see that all 3 pianists play most pieces slightly slower than Robert Schumann's metronome indications. Adelina de Lara plays the pieces on average 8% slower than the metronome indications. Fanny Davies and Carl Friedberg play them around 13% slower. Traumerei is the only piece all 3 pianists play significantly slower than indicated. But it must be noted that this mainly refers to the speed of the opening bars. All pianists play other bars much faster. Other pieces such as Kuriose Geschichte and Glückes Genug are played faster than indicated by all 3 pianists. If the pianist would interpret the pieces according to a double beat interpretation of the metronome indications, then all pieces would have been played slower. This is clearly not the case. Only for Traumerei one could say that a double beat interpretation would be consistent with the tempi chosen by the pupils of Clara Schumann. So these are my conclusions. Clara Schumann's pupils roughly adhere to Robert Schumann's metronome indications, but did not play strictly in tempo. They made deliberate use of rubato. They did not use a double beat interpretation of the metronome indications. Adelina de Lara displayed a strict adherence to the teachings of Clara Schumann. For example, they had conservative opinion with respect to the fingerings. Pupils were taught that fingerings must never be selected to make a passage easy. Adelina de Lara was very proud of this tradition and is therefore not plausible that her style of playing, which is very similar to that of other pupils, would be very different than that was taught by Clara Schumann. From Fanny Davies, it was said that her play seemed to have been a perfect reflection of her teachers. Therefore, it is very likely that Clara Schumann also did not play the pieces much slower. In conclusion, it is clear that Clara Schumann's pupils did not play according to the double beat interpretation. I believe it is unlikely that Robert Schumann wrote the Kinderszenen with a double beat interpretation in mind. It would make no sense that such a tradition would have died out completely within the lifespan of Clara Schumann. As Clara Schumann prided herself in a long tradition of a piano school with roots going back to Moscheles and Czerny, it seems inconceivable that there is a support for the double beat hypothesis of interpreting metronome indications by the pupils of Clara Schumann. It is therefore not plausible that Robert Schumann himself wrote metronome indications with a double beat interpretation in mind. Of course, there is nothing wrong with playing music at half speed, and Wim made a great case that Robert Schumann music also sounds beautifully at half speed, but claiming that Robert Schumann has meant it that way, I think that's unfounded. I appeal to any pianist who is really interested in playing Schumann's music as it was heard in the 19th century to listen very carefully to the recordings by Fanny Davies, Adelina de Lara and Carl Friedberg. I will provide links to their performances which you can find on YouTube below in the description. Happy listening! Let's end this video and give music the last word. For this I have selected Der Dichter, spricht, played by Carl Friedberg, another pupil by Clara Schumann. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you click the subscribe button, I may be encouraged to make some more videos about classical music. Bye!